Just some noise. Keith, you can take care of that. Okay. So you're here to see President Trump. Have you met President Trump before?
Yes, I've met him. I met him in Hamburg at the G20 meeting. We had a good call. We talked about the region, talked about bilateral relations, and I look forward to seeing him again.
And so you'll sign the agreement, or the agreement will be signed about the airplanes there?
Yes, SIA is signing it with Boeing. It's a private agreement, but it's emblematic of the relationship and of what we hope America will get in Asia and why America has great interest in what's happening.
So TPP, as you mentioned, was not agreed to by the United States, but the countries that signed onto it in Asia, they are going to move forward without the United States in effect?
Well, we are talking to one another about how we can move forward without the United States. 12 minus 1 should be 11. But when you make 12 minus the biggest one, you're not quite sure what the remainder is. And it's complicated because it was a deal which was on the basis that America would get something considerable out of it, the other countries would get something considerable out of the US. And overall, when the US joined, it fundamentally shaped the structure of the package. And now we've taken up the US, and the rest of us, having made all these arrangements to satisfy Mike Froman. Now that Mike Froman is not there, why are we still doing that? Well, we are trying to work out a package which makes sense. I hope something can be worked out. We've been talking about it. I see that a new New Zealand Prime Minister has some thoughts on this. We'll have to see where she lands.
Okay, so the main message that you want to convey to the President today is what?
That Asia is important to the United States. Asia depends on the United States. There's a lot we can do together and a lot that we can contribute. And your policies need to be based in political support in America. But I hope it will be possible to develop that support in order to pursue policies which will benefit America for many decades, as you have done in bipartisan way for many years.
Now, historically, Singapore has had a very close relationship with the United States and still does, but also has a close relationship with China. So which country is more important to Singapore, United States or China?
I think they are both very important. The President Xi Jinping last year talked about overlapping circles of friendship, and we hope to be in that overlap.
Okay. Now, you were in China recently. You met with the four most senior Chinese leaders. What impression do you have of what Xi Jinping wants to do in his next 5 years?
They were busy preparing for the 19th Party Congress. I was there just a month before that. The Congress is in progress now. Xi Jinping has made his policy, the main speech at the beginning. He's laid out a comprehensive agenda which goes well beyond the next 5 years and stretches to 2050 of all the things that she'd like to do for China. And these are none of them earth-shaking new goals, because they've been talking about them for some time, whether it's economic growth, whether it's improving the living for the middle income, whether it's talking about social support, whether it's environmental, whether it's anti-corruption, or most important, and item number one, whether it's continuing vitality of rule of the Communist Party of China.
So when you were growing up, your father, as I mentioned earlier, was the first Prime Minister of Singapore. Did he say, I want you to go into government, or did he say you can do whatever you want, or did you?
No, he didn't plan for me to go into government. When I was about completing high school, I wanted to get a government scholarship because all the good students wanted government scholarships. And if you didn't, you thought something was wrong with you. And I got a government scholarship. And then a year later, we were building up the armed forces at that point, and the armed forces needed talent. And they introduced an armed forces scholarship, which is something new. And I decided to apply for it. My father encouraged me. So I went to Cambridge on an armed forces scholarship. And after that, I came back and served in the armed forces. Some years later, I spent a year, which not many of you, and a place not many of you would have been to, which is Fort Leavenworth in Kansas.
There's some people in Washington who probably have spent time there.
Now I have kindred souls, or some of them went to Quantico.
Okay,
so that was where I was headed. And beyond the armed forces, well, we didn't think quite that far, but probably somewhere in the civil service or in the public sector. But in 1984, predecessor, Mr. Goh Chok Tong, who was then my minister in the defense ministry, asked me, he says, would you be prepared to come into politics? And my wife had just died. It took me a while to think over, but I said, yes, I will do that. So I resigned from the army, stood for election, was elected, and went into government, and I've been there for now more than half my life.
Okay, and did your father tell you this was a difficult line of work, or he didn't discourage you, your father?
No, he didn't discourage me, but he did say it's going to be difficult because I'm his son, and people will make comparisons.
So now you have announced, I think, publicly that after the next election, you probably will not stay for the full term. Is that correct?
No, I do not want to stay the whole term. I've said that soon after the next election, I strongly hope that there will be a successor ready and in position to take over from me. And I really shouldn't be Prime Minister beyond 70 if I can help it at all.
So when you do step down as Prime Minister, what might you consider doing?
I will think about it then.
Okay.
I hope I will still have something valuable to contribute.
No private equity positions. So today, can you explain to people who haven't been to Singapore how Singapore has managed a relatively small population, 5.6 million people, to become one of the economic powerhouses of the world, really? You've got, I think, the third highest GDP per capita in the world. How did Singapore do this from a running start in 1965 when Malaysia didn't really think Singapore could actually grow very much?
Well, first of all, our backs were to the wall. Either we did this or we died. And there were a lot of people who thought we wouldn't do this, and there were some people who hoped we couldn't do this. So we decided we'd show them. So we got together, we worked hard. We pursued policies which at that time were unconventional, and in particular, we decided to allow ourselves to be exploited by multinationals. Because in the 1960s, the conventional wisdom was that multinationals were evil, they exploited the populations, and they were to be kept out and kept down, and you should promote your own indigenous economic development. And we decided that by exploiting us, they created jobs for us, and they generated markets for us, and they brought in technology and organization. I think so be it. And we were very happy to do that, and it led us to take off. So that was one very important factor. The second important factor is that we built up our armed forces through national service at draft, and every male citizen age 18 will do national service for 2 years, at that time 2 or 3 years. And we built up a credible armed force, and Singapore was seen as being defensible and not just a walkover as had happened during the Japanese invasion. And in the process of building up an armed force through national service, we also built a nation, because the people having served together with comrades of all different walks of life came out, and it changes your attitude towards the country.
Today, who do you see as your military rival that might actually invade?
Well, one of the reasons we have so many friends is because we have a good armed force.
Okay. And now let's talk about inside the country. You have a reputation for producing students that score extraordinarily high on math tests. Is there something that Singapore is doing in its schools that have such high math scores from your students?
We are not sure. I think our students work very hard, and the parents put a lot of emphasis on education. That's one part of it. Another part of it is that our math curriculum, somehow we seem to have found the right formula for the right combination between drilling and thinking. Because you do need to learn certain things, and at the same time you do need to know how to jump out of the box and solve problems, and we seem to have got the formula right. And other countries, including some American jurisdictions, have tried out our textbooks and seem to be happy with them.
Now, you were a math student yourself, is that right?
Yes.
And are you an expert still in math, or can you keep up with what the students are doing today?
No, I'm a voyeur. I just read what mathematicians do and wish I understood what was on it.
Now, a number of years ago, to some controversy at the time, Singapore invited gaming companies or gambling companies to enter Singapore, and some people were concerned about that. How has that experiment worked?
I think it has worked out well. It's contentious. It still is not unanimously welcome, but it is something which we thought would be a plus for us, because we convince ourselves that if we want to develop a tourism market, this was one way to do it. And it could be done in a way which would limit the social impact and which would generate dividends beyond the gambling profits. Because it's really a comprehensive resort. You've got conventions, you've got hotels, you've got retail, you've got restaurants, you've got shows, you've got a lot of other activities and spin-offs which make sense. And so we decided that we could take the chance. Our people were already exposed to gambling. There's all sorts of gambling legally happening in Singapore. There's gambling online, which is impossible to shut out. There's gambling illegally, which happens all around us. And well, we are not that virginal to be impossible to be exposed to temptation. So we decided to allow this. We made a market solution. We said if you are Singaporean and you go into the casino, it's $100 for 24 hours of exposure. It's a fee paid to the government.
So in other words, if you're a Singaporean, you pay extra. If you're from China, you don't pay extra.
That's right. And hopefully you'll gamble more from China and you will end up paying something to us.
Right. Now,
and that has worked out very well. The result is that it's mainly a foreign market. The impact on Singaporeans has been limited, and the impact on jobs in terms of GDP, in terms of revenues, has been considerable. So I say it's a plus.
Have you ever been in gambling yourself? Or?
I went in once to take a look.
Okay.
I paid $100 and was very regretful that I didn't do anything with it.
Okay. Now, Singapore, years ago, received some international attention. I think your father was against chewing gum.
Yes, he was. Implacably.
So he didn't want anybody chewing gum in Singapore, and you could be fined for that. Is that still the policy, or?
No, you can't be fined for chewing gum. What we did was to ban the import of chewing gum. Unfortunately, we are not a native producer.
Oh, so how do you get it then?
Well, some people smuggle it in.
Oh, okay. I thought the concern was, he was concerned was that people were taking it on buses and putting it under the bus chair.
Well, I think the final, I'm not sure if it's the final straw or the final wag, was when somebody took a lump of chewing gum and stuck it on the train door in the train stall. So he decided that was a good reason to pursue the matter, which he had wanted to do for a very long time.
Okay. Now, let's talk about Southeast Asian countries today, and let's talk about yours first. Why is Singapore a good place in which companies should invest? American companies or other companies? Why is it a good place to invest?
Well, if I may be permitted, commercial, it's where you're able to have political stability, a good environment to live, a good business environment to work, a workforce which works very hard and is disciplined and will be cooperative with management. And basically you're in the middle of a region which is prospering, and from Singapore you can cover a big part of the region. China to some extent, India, Southeast Asia, Australasia. And therefore you come to Singapore not just because of Singapore, but for the region.
Suppose we have been into Singapore and they're not interested in being a business person, they just want a nice tourist place. Why should they visit Singapore? What's the appeal of Singapore as a place to visit?
Well, you don't have to go to the casinos. You can just see the city, because the city itself, I think, is a very gracious place to live and something which we're very proud of. If you've been to Marina Bay, you have seen what the skyline is like, and walk around, you get a sense of what the people are like, the atmosphere, the absence of anxiety or insecurity. You don't see soldiers on every corner, policemen. But you see people who are working, who are getting business done, who are bringing up families, who are looking forward to the future.
You have a lot